All right, guys, welcome. Sorry, sorry for the volume. Okay, do me a favor. Again, if you're towards the back, let's try to like move a little forward. Since you guys won't have mics, if you guys have questions, that way, how do you pronounce it? Dr. Stevcheva will be able to hear you ask the questions. Okay, so again, try to filter into the front. It's wonderful to see so many new faces. As this is our first lunch and learn of the year, so a lot of people who have recently joined, welcome. We'll have about one of these about every month. December is going to be a bit busy because we're both going to have we're going to have a lunch and learn. We're going to have a career fair on December 14th, and we'll also have a field trip in December. We haven't decided on the date just yet, but we will be having our field trip to Millipore Sigma during the month of December, and there'll be 30 slots. So keep an eye out for the announcements because that'll be first come, first serve. But yeah, with that, I want to welcome our guest.
Thank you. So first I will introduce myself. My name is Liijana Steveca. I'm Associate Director for Clinical Trials for Clinical and Scientific Affairs at Miltenyi Biotech. It's an international company, and we have our offices here in Gaithersburg as well. And what I do there, I lead our clinical trials, and our clinical trials are mostly immunotherapeutic approach to cancer. I'm going to say just a few words about my background. I did my medical degree in Macedonia, which is my native country. I did my doctorate in Australia, at Australian National University. Then I got an offer to go to Canada, lived there for a while. Then I got an offer to come to USA. Actually, I came at invitation of University of Maryland, and I've been living and working here for 20 years, different state as well. So if you are looking for a career in science, that is the biggest advantage that I can think of, is the world is yours. You can work anywhere. There are no limitations, no board, no nothing. As long as you have ideas, you're hardworking, you can find a job anywhere. I did it, so I know. So in terms of research, I have done a lot of basic research in the lab, but also in the last 10 years, I also have joined and worked in clinical research. So my role now is clinical research. What I do is our scientists at Miltenyi developed a very nice immunotherapy for cancer, and mostly right now we are working on hematological cancers like leukemia, lymphoma, and so on. So what we do, we take the cells from the body, like we take blood from the body. We isolate the T cells. I know you know what is T cells, you're high school. So, and then we activate them. We a little bit activate them to be so that they can kill the cancer cells, and then we return them to the person, and that has worked extremely well so far. We have a success rate of over 90% cure, and with only one application. So I believe personally this is the future. We are now looking into developing therapies for solid tumors as well. We are yet to get to the clinical trial stage though, so.
And is that CAR T that you're describing?
CAR T, yes.
Yeah. And so, and the issue with the solid ones is that there's the T cells can't get to them because it's so dense, right? There's no interstitial.
There are things you can do about that.
Oh, cool.
We are working on it. Yeah.
So guys, this is cutting edge. This is literally,
Yeah.
this is new. This is what's happening right now.
Yeah, and the difference between our company and other companies that have commercialized this is that they have a product that is very expensive. It's like $500,000, $500,000 per patient because they manufacture the cells. What we do, we train the sites, the hospitals, to do it themselves. We give them all the tools, we give them the vector, we teach them how, and they do it themselves, and that costs a lot less. Now, we'll see if that will develop into a strategy that FDA might adopt as a point of care, treatment, because otherwise a lot of people cannot afford it.
Similar, I don't know if you guys remember during the pandemic, early on, they were trying to figure out the best way to be able to get vaccines to people. And that's one of the things that made the rollout take longer, because you had to have facilities that had specific capabilities to keep the vaccines at a certain temperature or things like that.
Yeah.
And so the same goes in terms of having people trained to be able to administer. And in the case of CAR T, you're taking the T cells from the patients.
Yeah, and you are actually culturing them.
Right. So, but it has to be based off them so that their bodies don't reject those T cells.
Yeah.
And so, so unless you have people trained to do it, you only will have you'll have fewer centers that can do it. So they're saying they're training the hospitals so that more places are able to provide this therapy to people with cancer.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So I don't want to talk too much. I want you to be able to ask me questions. Do you have any questions about clinical trials? I can talk about the process of a product going from the lab to the clinic, to the patient. Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I think the vast majority of you have not yet taken molecular. So that's what you're going to take junior year. And in it, you learn, and those of you who are currently in it, we haven't covered it yet. But you learn the process that a therapy and a drug goes through between initial research to all the way through being able to be used in a hospital, like in this case, or being able to be distributed as a drug through pharmacies, et cetera. What is the process for deeming that it's safe and effective? And so, so she's going to go through the process.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Because it's really cool. Like you probably hear, it's often on your phone, you'll get a pop-up. This new therapy is going to this trial. What do those trials mean? What does it mean when something says phase 1/2?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I just want to first to emphasize that the real magic really happens in the lab. No doubt about it. They are the one that have the idea. They are the one that start the whole process, We are only testing their ideas. So I want you to be aware of that. So once they come up with an idea, they first test it in vitro, which means like they test it on cells only. Then, if results are good, they're going to test it on 3 types of animals. This is generally what FDA requires. FDA is Federal Drug Administration, so all the clinical trials, they have to get an approval from them in order to proceed, okay? So they have to test it in 3 types of animals for safety. So if there are no safety problems, then we go to phase 1. The phase 1 clinical trial is a trial only assesses the safety of the product. So it doesn't look at how efficient it is. We only look at, are there any side effects, What does it do to people and things like that. Then if that is okay, then we go to phase 2. Phase 2 is a smaller scale trial, but also looks at the efficacy. So it's about 100 people, maybe a little bit, 50 to 100 people usually. Phase 3 is a larger scale trial. Usually it happens in several continents, several countries. It's a massive trial. And once phase 3 is successfully completed, then the product can be approved for use, but it also goes to phase 4. Phase 4 is once the product is approved, like the drug, there is still follow-up to see if anything will come up that is a safety problem. So that is phase 4. Now, sometimes you hear phase 1, phase 2. In some cases, if there are some data or the danger of having safety problems is low, FDA might allow you, instead of having phase 1 and then phase 2, might allow you to do phase 1/2, which means at the same time you assess the safety and you assess the efficacy of the drug. That's what it means.
So this is interesting to me. I'm sorry if you guys had questions and I'm cutting in. Feel free to raise your hand if you have questions. What's the process like where you apply for approval from for phase 1 or phase 1 and 2? Like, do you specifically apply for a certain type of approval from the FDA, or do they tell you after they get your preclinical results what you're valid for?
The process is you have to submit all the preclinical data. So all the data which is on cells, on animals, you have to submit to FDA. You have to have a protocol. What is a protocol? The protocol explains everything about the trial, how many people will be enrolled, which people can be enrolled, which people cannot be enrolled, how are you going to follow the safety, what are you going to examine, all these things. It's usually about over 160 pages with references and all, so that also is written and is submitted to FDA. Also what is submitted consent form. Now in the USA, nobody can test any products on you unless you agree to it. So you have to sign a written consent. And that written consent needs to contain everything about the trial, especially the safety problem that might happen in a language that the patient will understand. So that is also submitted to FDA. They look through all these documents and they say, okay, you can proceed, or we want you to change this and that, you know. And then once they give approval, then you have to go to your own IRB, which is it's a board that every hospital has that deals only with clinical trials, and they will also review your protocol and your informed consent, and you need their approval as well in order to start enrolling patients. It's a long process, yeah.
That's cool. Do any of you have any questions so far?
Yeah. Usually very late stage. I mean, because there is already there is already FDA approved commercial product, we don't get the patients that are eligible for that. So what we get patients that are really, really very ill. Patients that have failed 4 therapies, attempts to treat them, sometimes 6, you know, nothing anymore works for them except this.
And the reason for that is that if you have something that we know works or that is working, then it's not considered ethical to give them something that we're not certain about yet.
Yeah.
If you know something works. So if nothing has worked so far, then those are the people that you test at the stage 2 and stage 3.
Yeah. Stage 1, 2. Safety, but yeah. Oh, they have to have cancer. So yeah. So it's the same rules. Unless you're testing vaccine, in which case you're testing it on healthy people. No, these are volunteer patients. They don't get paid. And they are not supposed to get any benefits. And this is done, this is an ethical rule which prevents using the patient, because there are patients that maybe need money and will agree for the, you know, for the money that they're going to get, but that's not the purpose, so.
So that could affect the data, right? If a company wants these things to show that their drug is effective. And so if when these things are being tested, if patients could be paid. Do you see what I'm saying? Then you could end up influencing the data in some way.
They can, I mean, you can pay them if they need to come, let's say, several times for the trial. You can pay them for the trip, because you can't expect everybody will have money, you know, for that. Or if they have to stay in hospital or near the hospital, you can pay the stay to make sure that they are available. But that's about it. Yeah. Efficiency, we check in our trials. So we check after we infuse them with activated T cells. Then we test them at 28 days to see how is the disease progressing. Then we test them again at 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year, and after that, every year for 15 years. It's FDA is requiring that we follow them. But how do we know? We know how the disease. So usually they do PET scans, so you can see at the beginning, how many lymph nodes are involved and what is the situation. Also the blood, how many leukemic cells you have there, and then at 28 days you repeat that at 3 months, 6 months, and year, and so on.
Are you required to have like a placebo group as well?
No.
So because there's so much documentation of the cancer already, you can already compare to that?
It's not ethical. These are very ill people. You cannot tell them, I'm going to put you on trial and not give them anything. They're going to die. They're already at the end. So no, we don't have placebo. Everybody that is enrolled gets the treatment if they meet the criteria. Yeah. Yeah, whatever therapy they get, like if it's chemo or whatever, they do the same way, they do PET scans, they do blood draws and checking the blood for percentage of leukemic cells and so on. Yeah. Yeah. So most of our patients have already gone through 4 or 6 attempts to treat them, and those did not work. So this is kind of like the last resort for them.
Is there ever, so let's say, for example, it is effective.
Mm-hmm.
Is there ever a point later where this is tried as a primary intervention?
We are not there yet.
But I'm saying in the process of therapy testing through the FDA, is there a separate route for once something's been demonstrated as an effective therapy, demonstrate in comparison to other therapies?
Not yet. Nobody has gotten approval from FDA to treat it as a first therapy or second line even. Not yet, but there will be, I believe. Yeah.
But there's a term for the line of therapy.
Yeah.
So how does the FDA choose or designate lines? How do you get? Because I'm assuming from a company perspective, if it's an earlier line, it's being used more, and that's profitable. So I'm assuming you guys would be trying to get it recognized if it's possible. What's the process for getting into those line recognitions?
So if you want to commercialize a product, you have to apply for FDA approval. And then you need to apply to FDA for a trial that will do the trial as a first line of therapy or second line of therapy. So you have to repeat the whole thing.
But you start all the way at the end first. So the first time you do it, it's a last line or fifth, sixth line, and then each time you go further up, or
no.
So this could have been put in as a first line trial.
Yes, but no.
Okay.
Theoretically, yes, but practically no, because it's not going to be approved by the FDA. It has to be approved by them. Right. Because they believe that as a first line of therapy, patients have a lot of choices. So
if this is approved as a fourth line of therapy, say, could a patient request it as a first line?
No.
So after it's been approved as a fourth line, might your company then go back through and try to get it approved as a first line?
Yeah, we have to go and start the process again as a first or a second line. It's not like a fourth line. We say it needs to be 2 or more lines of therapy, but because patients have the option of getting the commercial product, for our trials, usually we get after 4 or 6 lines of therapy. So that failed.
This is super interesting.
Yeah, it's exciting, really.
Yeah. Sorry, I asked a lot of, yeah. So the question was, if they pass stage 1 of clinical trials, but then fail stage 2.
So these are not the same patients. You understand that, right? So phase 1, we are assessing safety. We are enrolling patients just to see if this is safe for them, if there are any side effects that could harm them, right? So if we pass the phase 1 and everything is fine, then we go to phase 2 and we enroll different patients. This therapy is given only once and it works 90%. That's the amazing thing about it.
But if it failed, so yours didn't, but a therapy that went through and passed phase 1, it's safe. And then phase 2, they find that it isn't effective. That'd be failing, right?
Yeah, that means that it's not going to get approved if it's not effective.
So this drug wouldn't go back through for this purpose. Now the drug might be, and some companies use this, they'll find another use for the drug, and then they might put it back through clinical testing for another purpose entirely. And then for that one, we already showed it was safe. They might actually get fast forwarded because it's already been shown to be safe in a phase 2 for whatever that was. And then if it's shown to be effective for whatever they're doing the trials for that, then it continues. But it won't be used for this purpose.
No. If it's not shown to be effective, there is no purpose of approving the drug. Why would you give the patient something that is not effective? Doesn't matter if it's safe, you know?
So we got about a minute or 2 left. So if you have questions, this is the time to ask them. It doesn't have to be specifically just about this process. It could be about other countries. It could be about...
Go ahead. Miltenyi Biotech. It's a German company. It's actually an international company. It has offices all over the world. But the headquarters are in Germany, but we have offices here in Gaithersburg. What did I do?
What drew you to the field?
So I did my medical degree. I worked. I mean, my path was not really classical path, you know, because I worked as a doctor for 10 years. Then I left the country because there was war, and I did a PhD. I did a doctorate in medical sciences. Then it wasn't really the way you would do it here. Would probably to go to for one of the MD PhDs program, and even an MD only program. If you want to go in research, you can. But I personally think, basic research is much more fun. Seriously.
Now, real quick to clarify, the reason why MD and not PhD, like not just PhD, is that when you're studying people, so with clinical trials, for example, you have to have an MD. You have to have a medical degree to study and to do trials on people. And so that's what that relates to.
Because you need to know what is safe, what is not. Yeah. Go ahead. You just do your PhD. You don't even have to do a PhD. You can go with science degree, but it's not the same level, you know. But if you do your PhD, then you go and you work somewhere, and you can develop your own product.
And that was a really good question for like a totally other reason too.
Yeah.
So the last question was talking how for clinical trials specifically, you need to have an MD. But for all the preclinical, the stuff where we're testing T cells in the animals and in the cells, none of that you need an MD for. And you could do it technically even after this program. If you pass the biotechnician's assistant credentialing exam, you can be working in companies like this just out of high school while also pursuing other degrees.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people that did the master's degrees and so on while working at Miltenyi. And also, you know, my position is not the highest in the organization. My boss has PhD only, so I need to have an MD because I'm assessing safety. So I'm looking at signs and symptoms in people and things like that. But
let's give our guest a warm welcome, warm round of applause. It was awesome. Thank you so much for coming. And keep an eye on your emails and on your Canvas for more updates, more events. Thank you for coming to our first Lunch and Learn. Don't forget, you can count this and fill out the form if you want as a Category 1 credit. And we'll be posting the recording on Canvas if you have any friends that you think might find this interesting. you can pass that on to them as soon as it's there. Cool? Thanks for coming, and have a nice one, y'all.